Did you know that the three wise men may not be who you think they are? Prepare to be surprised by a story that defies traditional understanding. Who were these mysterious men who crossed inhospitable deserts, following a star that seemed impossible to ignore? And most intriguing of all, what do the gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh they brought really mean? On this journey, we'll uncover the hidden secrets of these travelers, explore the enigma of the star that guided them, and reveal surprising truths about Christmas that many don't know. Imagine the scene: wise men coming from distant lands, armed with rare gifts and guided by a unique celestial light. Why would they risk braving the dangers of long journeys to find a newborn king of the Jews? The Bible, in the Gospel of Matthew 2:1, calls them wise men, but does not mention details such as their names, exact origins, or number. However, Christian tradition identifies them as Gaspar, Balthazar, and Melchior, symbolically representing the three parts of the world known at the time: Europe, Asia, and Africa. But were they really kings? Or could they have been astronomers, prophets, or something even more surprising? According to some scholars, these magicians had connections with ancient prophecies, especially that of Balaam, who predicted, "A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel," Numbers 24:17. Others suggest that their wisdom came from the influence of Daniel, who lived in Babylon and left a profound spiritual legacy. But what if these men weren't just scholars? What if they were part of a divine plan drawn up centuries before, fulfilling a much greater purpose? These sages could have come from Persia, where practices such as Zoroastrianism saw heavenly signs as divine messages. Or perhaps from Arabia, a land rich in gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Another theory points to Babylon, where the Hebrew prophets planted seeds of knowledge about the Messiah. What is known for sure is that they were looking for something transcendental, a king announced by a star that seemed visible only to them. But why didn't anyone else notice this peculiar celestial phenomenon? The star in the east, which led them to Jesus, was not just a bright spot in the sky. It symbolized the divine promise and destiny of the world. These men had no maps or guarantees of what they would find, only the faith that the star would lead them to what they were looking for. Their journey was more than physical. It was an act of devotion, requiring courage and determination to cross deserts, face cold nights, and escape thieves. And despite so many challenges, they continued, driven by a force far greater than human reason. When they arrived in Jerusalem, they asked, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? We have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him." Matthew 2:2. These words caused a stir, especially in Herod, a king obsessed with maintaining power at any cost. Herod was disturbed by the idea of a new king of the Jews, fearing that this birth would threaten his throne. At the same time, the mystery of the star grew. How did it guide the Magi so precisely? And how did they know that this phenomenon was linked to the birth of the Messiah? In the next section, we'll delve deeper into the symbolism of the star, the gifts given to the baby Jesus, and the growing tension surrounding this prophesied birth. The star in the east, also called the Star of Bethlehem, is one of the greatest mysteries of the Christmas narrative. It wasn't just a bright light in the sky, but a phenomenon so unique that it motivated the Magi to embark on an epic journey. The Bible tells us that this star guided them precisely, stopping exactly where Jesus was, Matthew 2:9. But how could this be possible? How could a star move and point to a specific location? Many have tried to explain the Star of Bethlehem. Some scientific theories suggest that it could have been a planetary conjunction, like the alignment of Jupiter and Saturn, creating an exceptional brightness in the sky. Others think of a supernova, a comet, or even a rare stellar explosion. However, none of these explanations can fully justify the behavior described in the Gospels. This star didn't just shine, it guided with precision, moving as if it had an intelligence of its own. This leads many to believe that it was something far beyond the natural, a direct manifestation of God's glory, similar to the pillar of fire that guided the Israelites in the desert, Exodus 13:21-22. But why was this star perceived only by the Magi? After all, it was visible in the sky to everyone. The answer may lie in the spiritual preparation of these men. They were scholars, possibly familiar with the Hebrew prophecies, and were attentive to heavenly signs. Balaam's prophecy, Numbers 24:17, mentioning a star that would come from Jacob, could have been a key clue. In addition, Daniel's words in Babylon about the time of the Messiah's coming, Daniel 9:25, may have served as a warning to those who watched the heavens with trained eyes and open hearts. As the Magi followed the star, they faced dangers and challenges that few would dare to face. Scorching deserts during the day and freezing nights were only part of the difficulty. The threat of bandits was constant on the trade routes of the time. Still, they persisted. But what motivated them? These men were not Jewish. They had no direct ties to the messianic promises. Their journey seemed to be guided by something greater than simple curiosity, a search for a truth that transcends cultures and beliefs. This star was, for them, a universal message. Finally, when they reached Bethlehem, the star stopped over the place where Jesus was. Imagine the scene: noble and wise men, dressed in exotic costumes, humbly entering a simple home to prostrate themselves before a baby. It wasn't a palace. There were no guards or riches in sight. But there was something there that transcended all earthly glory. The Magi brought 3 gifts that carried deep and prophetic meanings: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Gold, recognized since ancient times as a symbol of royalty, represented Jesus as the King of Kings. Although the world didn't recognize him, the Magi knew they were standing before the eternal ruler, whose kingdom would never end. Isaiah 9 verse 6. Frankincense, used in sacred rituals, pointed to his divinity and role as high priest, the one who intercedes between God and man. Finally, myrrh, perhaps the darkest of the gifts, was used both as perfume and to embalm bodies. It anticipated Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, indicating that he had not only come to rule, but also to suffer and die in redemption for humanity. These gifts were not just valuable, they were prophetic statements about who Jesus was and what he had come to accomplish. Even if the Magi didn't fully understand the symbolism of their offerings, their gestures were guided by divine wisdom. Gold for the king, frankincense for God, and myrrh for the Redeemer. The simplicity of the place where Jesus was did not diminish the Magi's reverence. On the contrary, they understood that the Messiah's greatness lay not in the place where he was born, but in the mission he carried. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Herod was plotting. His reign, marked by paranoia and violence, was threatened by what he believed to be a political rival. Disguising his intentions, Herod had instructed the Magi to return to inform him of the baby's whereabouts. He claimed that he also wanted to worship him, but his intentions were dark, to eliminate any threat to his throne. But God intervened. In a dream, the Magi were warned not to return to Herod and took another route back to their land. At the same time, Joseph was instructed to flee with Mary and Jesus to Egypt, protecting the child from Herod's wrath. The Magi's journey, full of faith and courage, concludes with their obedience to the divine warning, highlighting how even those outside the people of Israel can be instruments of God's plan. Herod, realizing that he had been deceived, ordered one of the cruelest acts in his history, the slaughter of the innocents, in which he had all the children under the age of 2 executed in Bethlehem and the surrounding area. His desperation to maintain power contrasts brutally with the humility of the true king, who had already escaped to fulfill his divine purpose. While Herod continued in his desperate attempt to maintain control, the Magi had already returned by another route, protected by divine warning. Their journey of faith had been completed, but the impact of their visit echoed far beyond Bethlehem. They had found the promised king and prostrated themselves before him, a gesture that symbolized the union of different peoples around a single savior. However, the conflict was far from over, and the shadow of Herod's conspiracy continued to hang over the child's life. Fleeing to Egypt was not a simple geographical move. For Joseph and Mary, it meant abandoning everything again: their newly established stability, their community, and even their family. Imagine the tension and emotional weight of this journey: a young couple with a baby, crossing foreign lands in search of safety. But Egypt, ironically, became a refuge, the same place that had been a symbol of oppression and slavery in Israel's history. This journey was more than an escape, it was the fulfillment of yet another prophecy, as it says, "Out of Egypt I called my son," Hosea 11 verse 1. Even in the midst of chaos, God's hand guided every step. Meanwhile, in Bethlehem, Herod's decree brought one of the darkest scenes in the biblical narrative. The so-called slaughter of the innocents was not just an act of cruelty, it was a desperate attempt to defy God's plan. Herod, a man obsessed with power, went beyond his paranoia and ordered all male children under the age of 2 to be murdered. Matthew describes the echo of the prophet Jeremiah's words. "A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping in great lamentation. Rachel wept for her children, and would not be comforted, for they were no more." Matthew 2 verse 18. This tragic scene symbolizes the eternal confrontation between good and evil. Herod, like so many before and after him, tried to eliminate the light from the world, but he didn't succeed. The star that guided the Magi to Jesus could not be extinguished. God was one step ahead, as always. Divine providence protected the child who would bring redemption, while Herod's plans ended in failure. Joseph, once again obedient to the warning in his dream, remained in Egypt until Herod's death. Only then was he instructed to return to the land of Israel. However, upon learning that Archelaus, Herod's son, was ruling in Judea, Joseph feared for his family's safety and moved to the Galilee region, settling in Nazareth. Thus, yet another prophecy was fulfilled. He shall be called a Nazarene, Matthew 2 verse 23. Every detail of the story seemed intertwined in a greater plan, showing that nothing was beyond divine control. The Magi, although they disappeared from the narrative after their visit, leave profound lessons for us all. Their journey reminds us that the search for truth requires sacrifice, courage, and humility. These wise men possessed wealth, position, and knowledge, but they went beyond all this to follow something that the world around them ignored. They went beyond appearances and recognized God's glory in an unlikely setting, a humble home, with a child wrapped in simplicity. The star that guided them symbolizes the light of Christ, which illuminates the darkness and guides those who seek Him. That light still shines today, inviting everyone, rich and poor, wise and simple, to find the Savior. But just like back then, following this light can mean facing obstacles, abandoning comfort, and challenging the world's expectations. The story of the Magi challenges us to reflect. Are we willing to follow the star and seek the truth, even if it takes us down unknown paths? The gifts the Magi brought carry a symbolic weight that transcends time. The gold represented the royalty of Jesus, the King of Kings. Frankincense pointed to his divinity, as the one who is worthy of worship. And the myrrh, perhaps the most enigmatic, anticipated his sacrifice and suffering, reminding us that Jesus' mission was intertwined with the cross from the very beginning. These gifts were not just material gifts, they were living prophecies, proclaiming who that boy was and the eternal impact of his life. As the story progresses, we realize that the events surrounding Jesus' birth were not just isolated, but part of a carefully orchestrated divine plan. Each character, the Magi, Herod, Joseph, Mary, played a unique role in revealing this plan. Some chose to obey and follow the light, while others tried to resist and erase the truth. But the story of Jesus is a powerful reminder that, even in the midst of darkness, the light prevails. The Magi disappeared from the narrative, but the light that guided them continued to shine, bringing hope and transformation to the world. They had fulfilled their role, and their gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, not only symbolized aspects of Jesus' identity, but also sustained his family in times of need. By settling in Nazareth, Mary and Joseph were able to raise Jesus in a humble but protected environment, away from the inquisitive eyes of Herod and his successors. The choice of Nazareth, a small village despised by Israel's elite, was deliberate. Just as God had chosen a stable for the birth of his son, he now chose an insignificant town to house Jesus' childhood. This choice reflects the divine pattern, to exalt the humble and to work where it is least expected. Nazareth became the setting for the development of the man who would change the course of history, showing that greatness does not depend on origin or status, but on God's purpose. While Herod represented the kingdom of this world, oppressive, selfish, and full of fear, the Magi symbolized the opposite: humility, obedience, and faith. Herod, in his quest for power, was blind to the truth and missed the opportunity to meet the true king. The Magi, on the other hand, came from distant lands, faced dangers and sacrifices to follow the star. Their journey teaches us that true wisdom lies not only in knowing the signs, but in acting on them. This lesson is even more powerful when we consider how God used unexpected means to reveal his will. A star, an almost forgotten prophecy, and a group of strangers were the instruments that announced the Messiah's arrival to the world. This challenges us to be attentive to the small signs that God places in our lives, even when they seem unusual or difficult to understand. The star that guided the Magi was more than a celestial phenomenon. It represented the light of Christ, which illuminates the way for those who seek him. It stopped exactly where Jesus was, demonstrating that God's plan is detailed and personal. Just as the Magi were guided, each of us is invited to follow this light, trusting that it will lead us to the truth. The story of the Magi ends with a warning. The confrontation between light and darkness continues. Herod tried to extinguish the light, but failed. He didn't know that Jesus' arrival marked the beginning of a spiritual revolution that would destroy the power of sin and death. Even in the face of threats and persecution, the light of Christ remained and continues to illuminate to this day. But what does this story mean for us now? The Magi, with their wisdom and courage, show us that the search for truth requires action. They didn't just see the star, they followed it. They didn't just recognize Jesus as king, they fell down before him and worshipped him. This is the essence of the Christian calling, not just knowing the truth, but living according to it. Just as the Magi offered gifts to Jesus, we are challenged to offer our own gifts, our worship, our service, and our faith. The gold, frankincense, and myrrh remind us that Jesus is our King, our God, and our Savior. But these gifts are not just symbols, they are invitations to live in total submission and trust in who He is. The story of the Magi is also a message of inclusion. They were not Jews, but foreigners, Gentiles. Yet they were the first to recognize Jesus as King. This points to the promise that the gospel is for all peoples, tribes, and nations. Jesus came to be the Savior of all, and His light continues to call people from all cultures and backgrounds to Himself. Finally, we are reminded that the light still shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1 verse 5. Just as the Magi followed the star, we are invited to follow Jesus, the light of the world. No matter how distant or lost we may feel, His light is enough to guide us back to the right path. If you were touched by this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends, and leave your opinion in the comments. See you in the next video.